Brilliant. So we are live. Welcome to another edition of Road Dog Speaks. I am obviously the host, Road Dog, and today I am joined in a stream by Captain Swiss, who viewers may already know, and also Calum Ferguson, who is with us today. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, nice to be with you.
Brilliant.
I want to offer my apologies off the bat, just in case I think my internet's not great today. So if I'm a little bit out of sync or accidentally talking over anyone, I do apologise.
No problem. So yeah, today's stream is obviously going to be about, as you can probably see in the title, it will be a discussion on what has happened in the week. Obviously, the rolling coverage of the tragic Queen passing, which has literally been, the centre of the commentary in the news this week. So we'll obviously be discussing different aspects of that news, and we'll pretty much stay around that sort of topic. We might throw in some odd bits about, the government and Liz Truss, etc. But mostly we'll be discussing how the narrative has sort of gone on throughout the week, from the Thursday where the announcement was sadly made to sort of a week onwards, where it's exactly a week today since it happened, and how the media has sort of progressed with this story and gone on and on and on and on. So yeah, and then we'll also talk about the protesting aspect. So obviously there's been a number of arrests that have taken place as a result of the coffin being sort of taken through not just the streets of London, but also Edinburgh as well, and Balmoral, and sort of people's opposing opinions of that, which there are plainly many. So first off, the Queen passed this time last Thursday. I think it was around now. Well, it was probably about 6 o'clock, just after 6.
It was 4:30 it actually happened, according to the BBC, but they
Well,
waited a couple of hours to announce it.
Yeah,
I imagine it's like the scene in Charade, if anyone's seen that film with Audrey Hepburn, where they had to check the guy was dead. All the goons came in and with different ways of checking the guy was dead. I always imagine that's like how a monarch dies. Everyone has to check they're definitely dead first, in case it's a succession crisis.
So just in case people have missed it, I've got a little video of like the moment it was announced on the BBC, because obviously there's a moral of this has been, in the works for decades. Operation London Bridge, which is the code word for the Queen dying.
And it was unfortunate she died in Scotland, and all those plans were thrown out.
They had a set of plans in place for if it was
Operation
in Scotland, Balmoral as well,
yeah.
though.
But the problem is everyone was focused. Everyone assumed the Queen would die in England. Balance of probability would be that she would, and so everyone focused on that plan, and so it all went to hell. Also, she died too late in the day for it to not all go to hell when the plans, and that's why the funeral's actually on the Monday. I read that somewhere.
Yeah. So sorry, I'm just trying to open the share screen thingy because it's not letting me do it.
No worries. Just while you're working on that, then I'll ask the two of you. Did you? I mean, to a degree, we all had a sense this was coming. She was 96, but it was clear that her sort of health had been declining at least over the past year or so since Philip went. Did either of you sort of have a feeling within the weeks or days leading up to this that this was likely to occur soon?
Not at all. It took me completely by surprise.
No, I had actually no idea. I thought she probably had at least a couple more years left in her.
I did also think the Queen would probably beat Louis XIV, but that was never that was never likely.
He ruled for 72 years, didn't he?
Yeah, but he did take the throne when he was still a child. So
I mean, I only saw the picture of the Queen meeting Liz Truss. I only actually saw that after the Queen had passed away. But looking at it, with hindsight and retrospect, she certainly did look a lot, frailer, thinner, and all the rest of it than she had in sort of even a year ago or so.
I think it's also people, a lot, especially older people, when they're reaching the end of their natural lives, they can hang on for a while beyond any reasonable expectation. For example, one of my great grandmothers, who died, the night that after, sorry, she met my cousin who had just been born, and then hung on for a few hours after we'd left, and then died later that evening. And it was we kind of all agreed it was clear that she was just hanging on to see her second great grandchild, and then she shuffled off. And I feel like the Queen was kind of doing that, but for Liz Truss.
I don't know.
Way to go.
Someone suggested that she was waiting to see the back of Boris Johnson before she decided to leave.
It's unfortunate that then those two things happened to coincide, her seeing off Johnson and meeting with Truss.
Yeah, well, it's all seemed to happen in the same week. So Boris Johnson leaving, Liz Truss becoming Prime Minister, and the Queen dying. That's a lot in a news cycle.
It's extremely convenient for the new Prime Minister.
Yes, very much so.
I heard today that the bonuses on, not to get too distracted, but I saw that the cap on bankers' bonuses that was introduced after the financial collapse is now being lifted by the Chancellor, and that's just kind of swept under the radar. Same as the complete removal of the moratorium on fracking. And in fact, I looked at the map, and it looks as if my area is going to start experiencing earthquakes from fracking soon.
Yeah,
I think as well, it's given a, if none of this had ever happened with the Queen passing away, then it very much would have been, Liz Truss Prime Minister, cost of living announcements, some kind of a mini budget. The focus would have very much been on her specifically and her government and what they were doing. And because events have completely overtaken that, whenever we've seen Truss, it's still very much like, oh God, it's Liz Truss. Is it really her speaking behind a podium for this, that, or the other? But at the same time, it's like there's a bigger thing being focused on right now. She's kind of just been shuffled on in, and it's like, okay, she's the Prime Minister, and she's there doing prime ministerial things, and it's like she's sort of become, by rubbing shoulders with King Charles, all of a sudden it's just very much she's now there as the PM.
I remember it reminds me of the good Scots word, this stooshy that Clive Myrie made, faux pas sort of thing.
Oh yes,
he did when he said that the cost of living crisis pales in comparison to this, and I think
it was insignificant.
I think that
Wrong word.
he's not wrong. He's just, it highlights the moral bankruptcy of Britain as a country.
Very tin-eared in the way that he said it, because from a historical perspective, absolutely, people will be talking about the Queen dying in 100 years' time and not the cost of living that was going on at the time. But certainly for for your average man and woman.
I mean only that he was very tone deaf in the way that he put it, but I also think it's also exactly the way anyone else would have put it, because that's the kind of psychosis that we have in this country.
I don't know.
Royal mania that exists only when a member of the royal family is ill or dies.
To be fair, he did get sort of checked by the correspondent. He'd said like, "Oh, overshadowed maybe," and like sort of put it sort of in a better light. Which is, and I think also, to be fair to Clive Myrie, I think he apologized on Twitter or something afterwards, saying like, "Oh, this was a bad choice of language, and I'm sorry."
And also, I don't think it'd be really right to attack individual BBC journalists for what they say at the moment, because they are being stuck having to talk about the same thing for hours and hours and hours. I mean, there was a good joke, I can't remember who said it, that when Hugh Edwards was pulled off, regular, on the BBC One, and replaced with, I think it might have been Clive Murray later on last Thursday, he had been broadcasting pretty much non-stop, tied into a very tight-looking black suit with no refreshments, as far as we could tell, no bathroom breaks, for over 6 hours. Like, that
Wow.
can that would make me stammer and
Yeah.
say tone deaf, silly things.
I think. Oh, sorry.
So I was just going to quickly finish that. I don't think that's.
Sorry, it's the time delay because of my internet.
All right, that's fine. It was just that I don't think the exact wording of Clive Murray's statement was in any kind of editorial stance from the BBC, or perhaps even anything he personally believes. But that's me enough defending the BBC. I have a lot more harsh things to say later.
It's a nice little taster of things to come. I was just going to say quickly though. I think. I think I'll get no argument in saying that this is the most significant royal-related event to happen in our lifetimes, and indeed, arguably, in the lifetimes of most people alive in this country as well.
I think it's the most significant royal
Just
thing
if we're talking about, it's.
Oh, sorry, I think the time delay
death
again
of
was an
Princess
issue.
Diana, I'd assume.
No, I was going to say I was going to say the abdication in 1936.
But that wasn't in our lifetimes, though.
I know it wasn't in our lifetimes, and the Princess Diana's death was not in mine. But the point is that I think that this overshadows anything compared to, even the abdication is probably not as significant. The death of Queen Victoria was probably the only thing that could be compared to this, and that was 120 years ago. So,
but
I mean, not. Sorry, go
on. No, I was just going to say, I think that this happening, it's all been like a long time coming, because we know, the Queen's not going to last forever. Like, I think that was, one of the prevailing thoughts, that like, oh, we all thought the Queen was going to go on, and she'll be in our lives forever, and she's like been always a constant figure. But obviously not, because like we're all human, and despite the sort of godlike sort of I don't know, sort of
aura,
imperial,
if you will.
majesty. That's the word, just majesty.
Yeah. So despite that, she's an elderly, frail lady who reached the grand old age of 96, and then popped her clogs, you could argue, at the perfect sort of time where, a new prime minister has come in, and and the old one's gone out, and it's sort of like a new government, and we've left the EU, and blah blah blah, and that's it's like you've had your innings, and that's it. So
she shuffled off this mortal coil right at the point where you could say that is it birds, chickens, hens are coming to roost on all of the major changes that have happened in Britain over the last 10 years. That we've reached the point where everything is starting to come to a head, and she shuffles off the stage, and I think fundamental changes are going to happen in this country. And I think that her death has accelerated it.
Yeah.
So I'm slightly distracted by
I apologise, but
it's fine.
Yeah, I'm just trying to move to a place where I can get probably slightly better internet connection.
Okay, that's fine. I was just going to finish by saying that I do think that this is the beginning of the end of Britain. I mean, this is it. The game is up when it comes to Britain being like this imperial entity with a vast Commonwealth realm of. I mean, the king is the king of 15 countries, and numerous territories. In fact, not 15 countries. He's technically king of 14 Commonwealth realms, numerous territories, and then England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland, or Northern Ireland. But he's king of all those kingdoms. The only person I think in history that had more titles was the bloody Austrian emperor.
But my response to that is, like, from viewing what has been going on the past week, and with all like the various pageantry and all the uniforms and all the so many, like the vast amount of involvement like the state has in this event, which is obviously a really important event. And to me, like, because what I would have expected, maybe I'm a bit naive in thinking this, but I would have thought that the monarchy would have been a bit more sort of slimmed down, like sort of let's not, keep going with this like huge, like imperialistic, like.
Are you saying
of,
that? Are you surprised by the level of pomp?
I don't know why I'm surprised,
I
but
think what
I
it
am.
is you might have. I think you're right, but I think you're one generation removed from what's going to happen. So, because of the the length of her reign, the the impact that she has had as an individual, I
Yes,
think.
I understand that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that what it is this is, as I say, the jig is up. This is it. This is
This
the
is
last
the
moment
last
of.
big one,
This is the
if you
last
will.
big hurrah of the British Empire. I mean, it collapsed a long time ago, but this is the point where everyone has woken up, smelt the coffee, and realised this is it. The party's over. The empire is over. The last physical remnant of the empire is over, because we need to remember that when the Queen acceded to the throne, we still controlled over half of Africa. We'd only just, the king was still known as His Royal and Imperial Majesty just 5 years before the Queen took the throne. And now that's all gone, and it's all just going to continue to disintegrate. And I think that the Queen dying at this exact moment in history is a catalyst. Jamaica was already talking about becoming a republic. Trinidad, is it Trinidad or is it Antigua, became a republic just the other year.
yeah,
Australia is going to become a republic very soon. The only countries that show really, real strong support for the monarchy are the tiny little island countries, with populations of less than 1 million. Pitcairn Islands or the St Kitts and Nevis. Canada and Britain. Those are the only countries that show any support for the monarchy anymore. The rest of the Commonwealth is just dissolving around us, and no one wants to respect the king. You know, the Queen, she had
especially
the
after
respect from
the
being
charade of the pennies.
so venerable. The king has none of that.
No. I was just going to say that the whole ordeal that he had with the fountain pens and signing whatever his
I just
wish.
thought that was quite funny.
I was like,
It's like,
do you think the Queen would have reacted that way? I don't think she would.
no, I think
No.
that if
Like,
she'd been in the exact same situation,
Like,
I think if she'd been in the
fine.
exact same situation, I would imagine that she would have dealt with it differently, because of the, different individual, different upbringing, different interaction with the world. I think, though, every single thing I've seen about this, because I watched both of these things happen live, and I kind of understood at a personal level, wanting to get the pens out of the way so you don't accidentally knock them over the table at your proclamation ceremony. And then when
Yeah.
you're in Northern Ireland, your pen bursts and you get ink all over your hands. You'd be quite annoyed with that.
He does. He
At the
does.
same time, it looks really bad on camera when you remember
Yeah.
this man is the
Yes.
king.
Yes.
We
And I think
expect more.
I think as well. It looks. That there are many of us with sort of moments where we haven't acted in the way that we would have liked to if they'd been caught on camera for many millions to see. We'd go, "Oh Christ, that's painting me in a bad light." I will. I will be forgiving in the sense that he's a bloke in his 70s under immense stress and pressure this week of all weeks, especially having lost his mum. It's certainly not to excuse and say, "Oh, you could have been a little bit more courteous to your staff," but I can, if there's ever a time to give someone something of a free pass over something, it is perhaps under these circumstances.
Yeah, and I did tweet this the other day. I was like, to play devil's advocate for a moment, like I imagine he's extremely stressed out and anxious, and he's made it really clear that he's been really anxious about this moment for years, and the fact that he really was dreading it, and he's obviously in mourning for his mum who's just lost. So if you want to get pissed off at some pens not working, then I suppose that's fair.
Can I ask that? I mean, if you don't mind, because I seem to be back in real time with you guys now, which is really nice.
Excellent.
Could I ask you sort of like where you are with your relationship with the constitutional monarchy of this country, sort of like how you view it, or perhaps how you may have viewed it in the past versus how you view it now?
2 words. I have 2 words. Total contempt.
Okay.
Right. I don't think I was quite indifferent before. I mean, it was always a sort of entity that was just there, that just existed. And I mean, to be honest, on the day that she died, I was a little bit like, it sort of made me stop and go, oh, like, oh, this has happened. Like a constant in my life has suddenly disappeared. But I wasn't like totally bereft, when I've not cried at all. So, and
Yeah.
now having watched, the endless coverage, and the way that it's been sort of, the way that the commentators and the journalists have been sort of hand wringing, and just they can do nothing. It's nothing but praise, and there's
They're
no room.
breathlessly
There's no room
sycophantic.
for any discussion at all. I'm now just like, oh well, you're clearly not wanting to, have any other alternative views, or introduce any sort of stuff about like colonialism or empire or stuff like that. You only want to talk about like how wonderful this lady was, and like she couldn't do enough, and she was working every day, she's worked so hard, and all of this just like fluff and praise, and like just, I was like, I'm really, really now. And there was even a clip, I don't know if you guys saw it, of they got on to, like, this was like the third or the fourth day, and they started discussing her thing that she did with Paddington Bear, and this journalist was like, "Did you know that the Queen was acting, and there was nothing there, and she was acting to just air?" And they were like,
Is that how
"Yes,
CGI works? Oh my god!
yes, he
So
was."
hear
It's
me
like,
out with
yes, it
this.
was all CGI, and there
Excuse
was
me.
no real bear. And they were like,
Right.
"Oh, really?" And I was like, "Oh, for real, please? Like, this
Can I
is
ask you
silly."
both a quick
But
question, right? On the day, so last Thursday, maybe even into Friday, did either of you actually not cry or have any kind of like, but did you feel the emotional weight of what had happened? And has that not just dissipated with time, but been smashed by the breathless sycophants on
quite
Twitter and in
possibly,
Britain, and that
yes.
you feel almost more annoyed, less respectful, less interested in being respectful because of the dogged insistence of everyone else that you have to be?
Yes, I think
I
so.
almost want to shout "fuck the Queen" at the top of my lungs in the middle of Glasgow, Glasgow city centre, just because, just so that someone would beat me up for saying it. I don't want that to happen, by the way. Just that, it feels like I'm being driven away from any kind of. I'm being driven away from how I'm expected to feel by that forced expectation. I
I
watched an American woman in the queue in London crying. She'd flown all the way from America just to be in the queue to shuffle past the Queen's coffin in Westminster Hall on the news, and she was interviewed on the news.
Yeah.
Now, I don't understand what was going through that woman's life, but I looked at it and I just turned to my father, who was watching the news with me this lunchtime, and I said, "That woman to me looks pathetic."
There was
I,
also a lady who I saw, she got interviewed, and she was like, "I've been round 7 times, and I'm about to go into my
I've
8th."
seen that. Yeah.
Like,
oh
Um,
God,
can,
not
I
arrive
didn't
at
see
Alton
that.
can
Wow,
Towers.
I
wow.
Goodness
can I
sake.
answer your question? By the way,
Of course, yeah.
I'd say that when I first found out the news, I think I had this sense of a very significant event having happened, an event of great enormity, and with anything like that, it takes a little while to sort of settle in, and you sort of kind of go, okay, I've read what's happened, I've taken in that factual bit of information there, but then the reality of it and the significance of it sets in after a while. I would say though, if anything, I've probably had over time the reaction to everything that you may have. I haven't been I mean, for one thing, no, I have not cried here, and if I've not done so at this point, then I doubt I will do in the future. But I think, if anything, over the days since the Queen died, I don't think I've moved to a less caring or respectful place of it. If anything, I think I've moved to a more caring and respectful place. But I feel that's wishing to feel individualistic. I'd like to feel that's in spite of the wall-to-wall coverage rather than because of, if you will.
That's interesting.
But I think for me, it's a matter of just the historical significance as one measure of it. The fact that it was the monarch of the country that was there for over 70 years, and sort of starting to see some of the machinery of our constitutional monarchy democracy in action, and actually seeing things that have not been seen for by most people alive today in this country. The whole process of a new monarch taking over, and how Parliament interacts with them, and sort of where exactly the monarchy sits versus the what's it described? The something and the efficient. You'll know this, Calum.
This is Walter Badger's thing. It's I think it's the dignified and the efficient.
That's it. The dignified and the efficient.
The monarchy, the royal family, provides the dignified element of the constitution, whereby, and also Kingsley Martin, who I think founded the New Statesman. I have his book here from 1936, called The Magic of Monarchy, and they talk about magic a lot, about how the monarchy has to have this mystic element to it. It has to appear as though it is this mystical thing that has lasted. It has to have a sort of Arthurian legend about it in order for it to function within the constitution, because otherwise it looks exactly what it is: a bunch of pompous German prats who've been ruling over us as parasites for thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they've not been German for thousands of years,
which we have no utility for them whatsoever. But the moment you introduce the magic, the moment you introduce the mysticism, it starts to have an effect on people, and people start to think, well, maybe it is not necessary, but dignified, that we are in some way a more, what would be the word? I suppose it would be dignified, or sort of gentlemanly, and sort of prim and proper country. With a more civilizing aim, if we have this enlightened monarchy ruling over a supposedly democratic system, and it all works together in a stable concert. It's sort of high Tory utopia.
Yeah, sorry, Smith. No, I was just going to respond to your sort of take on it. In that, I think I would have appreciated the sort of ceremonial sort of mechanisms more had it not been on constantly, and like it's sort of an enforced watch. Like if you're watching TV, then it's like you're gonna see it, and it's like,
yeah.
Well, and also, can you sort of? It's very one-dimensional, which irritates me, because they're just talking about the same thing, and they're not wanting to engage in like any sort of balanced discussion about this is why the Queen was amazing, but there are also some quite shady aspects as well.
It's when it's wall-to-wall coverage with 100% deference, then it's just it's one flavor, one tone, just constantly. The thing is, I rarely watch television these days. So the fact that it's been all over all the main channels non-stop for day after day, I've not really felt that myself, because I don't engage with TV very often. I'm a bit of YouTube, I'm a bit of Netflix, and then I'm a bit of the news sometimes.
Thank God for Netflix.
yeah. So I feel almost that all this wall-to-wall coverage, it's something that I'm hearing about, but I'm not actually seeing for myself. So perhaps that's had an impact on me not quite feeling so sick of the whole thing, because I haven't actually had to watch much of it.
Interestingly, I've tried to avoid watching it myself. I mean, I've seen little bits on like social media, but it's just sort of, and it's also been quite good for me, because I know that on Twitter and things like that, I know that there are people who also disagree and sort of, you know, you've got your echo chambers on sort of Twitter and Facebook who like have got the same opinions as you, and you're like, yes, here's some alternative discussion, thank God. But still, at the same time, it's like you still are aware that, you know, most of like the media are just fixated on this really deferential event.
yeah.
Like, no, thank you.
I can kind of understand the idea that even with the commitment that the BBC has to appearing impartial, actual impartiality completely. Let's not talk about that. Just the BBC wants to appear to be impartial, but it also realizes that it's under such constant pressure from the Tories that if they were to actually interview anyone who expressed Republican opinions, if they were to even imply that this is the time to consider moving on from a monarchical form of government, now that because a lot of people said, if interviewed or if polled, that I'm not in favour of a republic necessarily, but I might be more open to it once the Queen dies. Well, she's dead now.
Yeah.
Do you want a republic or not? I don't say we should have a referendum. I don't believe in referenda. But I think that republicanism as an idea will grow. And I think you need to start talking about it at the point where it's most poignant. But I also understand, yeah, maybe don't do that on the BBC before she's even in the ground.
Yeah.
At the same
Yeah.
time, you could at the very least have analysed her honestly as an historical figure, saying this is the Queen that did absolutely nothing to ease tensions in Kenya when the Mau Mau rebellion was going on. She made speeches in the 1950s to Parliament, Queen's speech, when she was setting out the government's legislative agenda, and had absolutely no qualms in talking about how her government, the government that was legally acting in her name, was attempting to suppress rebellion in Malaya. This was an empire that was desperately trying to hold on to its colonial possessions. And when it failed to do so, it realized it had to give up those colonial possessions and did everything it could to cover up its crimes by burning vast numbers of documents.
Oh,
And that is not being discussed.
I
hooray!
think
Yes, I saw this live.
I've managed to do it. I thought I couldn't, but the magic of screen.
I think
could
I've
I
quite a lot of things to say about this clip.
Just because I realise we're probably about to move topics. If I could just say one thing in response to Calum quickly, I think the actions of our country in regards to our colonial past and many of the things that we did during that, the slave trade, trying to maintain the colonial power, all the rest of it, rightly are things that today we look back on and go, they were not right then, and they are certainly not right now. And I understand the point in which you're making about saying, well, the Queen sat and made Queen's speeches while the government in her name was doing this, and the government in her name was doing that, and did nothing to speak out and intervene on those matters. But then again, it's largely consistent. It was her entire MO, in a sense, that she was there not intervening, whether it was for better or for ill on a variety of different issues. That was her thing. She didn't intervene. And by the nature of a constitutional monarchy, everything that was done in her name, because the whole government, the whole apparatus of the state is in her name. It doesn't mean that it sits right with me, but it at least feels consistent within the way in which
you believe it's an
reigned overall.
excuse. No, I don't want to debate you on this.
Okay.
I think I'm not going to try and fault you for this. I know that you're just explaining how a constitutional monarchy works. It's just, it does smack as an excuse. I'm not saying you're making it. I'm just saying, I think that the issue is that we want to make excuses for a constitutional monarchy. We want to say, oh, this individual woman was not blameless. So she was blameless, or that she was not directly responsible for what happened. And it is correct. The Queen was not directly responsible for the actions of her governments throughout her whole reign. You know, even when they were suppressing the Mao rebellion, even when they were, fighting hot conflicts, actually, gunning down civilians in Malaya, or when they were, I don't know, invading Iraq illegally, to give a more modern example. The Queen was not directly responsible for that, but she very really had the power, and this is something that is agreed upon in all constitutional documents, all sort of everyone who talks about what the Queen's role or the monarch's role in government is, has talked about warning, counselling, and advising the Prime Minister, about having an active role in government, not by directly intervening in legislation, but instead by gently pressuring. And this woman didn't do any of that, or if she did do it, she did it in such a way that preserved the imperial power of Britain. And I think that can't be excused. That is an example of the Queen being a colonizer.
And just to respond to that, I think that it would have been a lot healthier had the sort of population at large been educated about that side of the monarchy, because I think when people are interviewed, and like what I've heard people say, on the streets of what the Queen meant to them, there's nothing but sort of gushing and sort of positivity,
Service. They always talk about her service,
and there's no
and if you
other
ask them
sort of awareness of like
what that service was, they
yeah.
cannot elaborate. They do not know what it
I
is.
mean, there's no
that she
sort
did.
of rounded view of like what she actually represented, and who, like, she was like the Empress of Africa.
No,
India.
no, she was never Empress of anything.
Oh, Queen Victoria was the Empress of India, but
yes,
that's
and then there were three. There were four emperors of India. Edward, George, and the Queen. The Queen has always been just a queen, not an empress, but kind of. She still ruled over dozens of kingdoms when she became queen, and now, when at her death, she was still queen of technically 15 kingdoms.
Commonwealth countries, yeah.
Anyway, I'll say, sorry, if I can make one very final last point, and then I promise I'll let you move on to Prince Andrew the Nonce.
No, go ahead.
I think based on what you've said, Calum, and I've got no doubt that there are certain things we're talking about here that you have a better understanding of than I do, as far as some of these historical events go. So I think at the very least, what I will say then is that, as you've spoken about in the context of the Queen, advising and using her position in contact with these government ministers and the Prime Minister, and being able to speak to them behind closed doors and sort of guide them very gently towards correct courses of action. If it is indeed the case, preferable, yes. If it is indeed the case that these things were going on, she was fully aware of them, and indeed she either did not. Whether she either passively or proactively consented to these things going on, then that is indeed absolutely a problem. Because you would still, I would still grade any person against what their choices and actions were in that kind of a context. But just to be clear, I am talking about that in the realms of, as we're saying, sort of like guiding, advising, very much behind closed doors. Because anything more overt in terms of a political intervention does undermine the very concept of the constitutional monarchy we have now.
I mean,
it would no longer. No. I understand. The thing is, it's a funny old country we live in. That on paper, everything's for the Queen, and it's all in the Queen's name, and the government is in the Queen's name, and everything, and she is the one that holds all the power on paper. But the political reality is, whether it was her or any other monarch, if they started seriously intervening in the day-to-day political decision-making of the country and making their views very publicly known and persuasive, I don't think it would be too long before there was a good deal of backlash against that, and going, no, we want our head of states to not be overtly intervening in things rather than to be doing that. But that's a wider point. I know we've come away from speaking about.
I want to make one final statement just in response to that, and then I will not invite further comment. I agree with you that the relationship between the British government, His Majesty's government, and the King or Queen or whatever would be damaged by more thorough intervention, which is why I will refer everyone to look up the Black Spider memos, which were letters and memorandums written by the King, then claiming to be Prince of Wales, to British government ministers and politicians throughout the years in a deliberate attempt to intervene directly in the governments of Britain. He was using his position to influence legislation for various reasons. I don't know the full extent of it. I don't even know if everyone does. But the point is that
I have an awareness of it.
Important to remember that the man who currently is king it has at times tried to intervene in the way that our government functions. There is no legal restrictions upon his ability to do that, and I would argue that if he really did stress it, if he even went so far as to refuse assent to a law, which I don't believe he will do, but if he did, I don't think that it would cause his downfall. I think people assume that there would be a sudden rise in republicanism if the monarchy took a more proactive role.
Well,
but I don't think that's true. I think, in fact, if anything, people would actually become more royalist if the monarchy took an active role in government, if it was popular.
I think. Sorry, Rowan, go first.
When during the Labour government days, when they introduced the ban on fox hunting, I know that the Queen was like sort of vehemently against that introduction of that particular law, because she's obviously very countryside-y, sort of landed gentry ilk, and
the aristocrat,
loves killing small mammals.
So, but she's no choice but to accept that. So, yeah. In the interest of time, Swiss, do you want to make your last point and then we'll move on?
Yes, I will very quickly. I think that the key matter of concern for me with the Black Spider memos or letters as they're known would be whether or not Prince Charles at the time was using his position in order to coerce any change in the law, in order to pressure in a way. In a sense that ministers making those decisions, whether they are making them voluntarily and listening to lobbying, or whether they are going, "Oh Christ, it's the future monarch, I better do what they say." That's the distinction I'd probably look for in that matter. But yes, when I heard about it at the time, I did go, seems a little bit. But he's the king now. As long as he's not sort of denying royal. Oh, sorry. And the very, very final thing I was going to say, and I promise I'll stop now. Is that on the matter of whether the king ever did refuse royal assent or start involving himself in more things, even if they were popular, you're right. I don't think that would lead to the overnight rise of republicanism in this country, but I think it would be the beginning of a gradual fraying of the constitutional monarchy as we know it. And I think sometime down the line that would end up in a very bad place.
Yeah,
I'm more pessimistic than you on that now. I think we need to talk about the grand old nonce of York.
We do sort of have to move away from this discussion, as interesting as it is.
Okay.
We've spoken about the perceptions of the royal family, and what the general sort of how they're represented, etc. over the decades, etc. But now I'd sort of like to have a look at the protesting aspect that's been going on, and the sort of backlash, and like the republicanism, as we've just mentioned, within society, sort of showing its face. So yeah, you've probably seen this. Lots of people have probably seen this video, but this was filmed in Edinburgh. A protester heckling Prince Andrew during the procession of the coffin. So yeah, here we go.
A man I affectionately call the grand old nonce of York.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, to be fair, earlier that day he did grab his own daughter's arms.
Disgusting! Oh, I've done nothing wrong.
Yeah.
Now,
Okay.
that I think indicates everything. A lot of things. A lot of things just happened in that video.
Yeah.
One, the criticism was directed at the grand old nonce of York, a man who is an alleged paedophile who has paid millions of pounds of, as far as I know, either public or at least publicly obtained money. Like, he paid off the woman who was accusing him. That's not an acquittal.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
I think it's still fair to say that Prince Andrew may or may not have committed heinous crimes against people who were underage.
Yeah. Just being aware that that's a slightly different form of protest in light of that sort of like very specific towards a certain person. Whereas,
however, the location gives it a greater
yeah,
meaning.
I just would like to share another video, another quick one, because it relates to the sort of the same subject that we're talking about. Where I think it's a barrister that got approached by the police for holding a blank piece of paper, and he sort of got questioned and ruffled a little bit by the police. So, and admittedly, it's a Daily Mail video, but I couldn't find it anywhere else, so apologies that I've given them money. But, can you all see and hear that all right?
Yeah.
Could you just put the subtitles on? If there's captions available.
Oh yes, sorry. Okay.
Not really. Why would you ask my details? I'm in my city.
You've already said you've been arrested once.
Sorry?
You've already told me you've been arrested.
No, I haven't. No,
You said that.
no. I said other people have been arrested.
Okay, well, now we've made that clear. I want to make sure you get a bail conditions on speed.
So,
just confirm,
why
you're
would you
not
ask
giving me
me my
details.
I'm holding up a blank sign. Why are you asking for my
You
details?
said you're going to write stuff on it that may offend people.
I said I was going to write "Not My King" on a sign. And you asked for my details.
It may offend someone.
Who's that going to offend? Not my king. Someone might be offended.
Is that what you would have planned to do? Just talk over me?
Go ahead.
All right. I'll give you some advice.
Okay, so it stops there.
So, 2 points. One,
yes.
I understand the protest in Edinburgh wasn't directed at the king. Obviously, the one in London was. And I think it all sort of feeds into a thing, is there have been many situations where people have verbally or in a written, sign protested the accession of the new king,
Yeah.
or of the position of the royal family. And it's interesting, I think, that the police realise that they have effectively carte blanche. They know that the majority of the public is probably on their side, and they know that they, if they grab people, arrest them, take them off the streets, charge them on the public order charge, fine them, or stick them in jail for a week, or whatever, so long as they're not like dragging someone off, brutalising them, or killing them, they can get away with essentially whatever they want to do, and the police in general don't mind. And in fact,
can I ask a quick question just on something you just said? When you said that the police believe the public's behind them, are you saying that
behind them attacking protesters?
I would disagree with that. I don't believe a majority of the public approve of that.
The police then dragging them off is something I think most people, if questioned, would believe. They're not showing proper respect.
As we saw in the first video of the guy heckling Prince Andrew, he got a lot of like shoving and like sort of.
Oh yeah, the crowd themselves were the ones that brutalised them.
Started chanting, "God save
there were
the king."
3 people. So. Yeah, there were 3 people there who pushed him to the ground and pushed him around and were ready to beat him up. Basically, he was ironically saved by the police.
I think that
in that situation.
part of what makes this complex is we're talking about sort of different instances of different forms of protest. And I don't quite have a blanket response for all of them. In the case of what happened with the protester in Edinburgh and Prince Andrew, I mean, first of all, you know, Prince Andrew is a reprehensible figure. And I think it's quite frankly disgusting the way that he's been protected by our establishment, the royal family, the media, and so on. So in that sense, the things that guy had to say, there's nothing at all I disagree with there. I think the issue being it was within shouting distance of the Queen's coffin as it was rolling on by, and Andrew and other members of the family were there in the context of walking her coffin along the road. I think that this is perhaps what I find difficult. I'm trying to hold these two concepts in my mind at the same time of absolutely feeling the way about Prince Andrew that I do, and even going, yeah, call him out whenever you see him, and then also maybe going, just maybe not that particular moment in time where the Queen's dead body is right there in front of you.
Yeah, I think I'm inclined to sort of agree with you there, Swiss, because it's a really hard balance to sort of strike. I mean, I'd myself call myself sort of like a Republican, but at the same time, and also with regard Prince Andrew, like he should be completely shut off from the public and not, you know, be allowed to, you know, mingle among crowds, because, you know, it obviously leads to what we've just seen. But at the same time, like, it's his mum who's just died, and like, should you argue, like, should he be allowed to walk behind his mum's casket out of respect and, you know, duty and all of that, and wearing the uniform? It's like, do you think that's fair? Like, I mean, I think on this occasion probably yes, and with regard to like the protester, should he have, you know, shouted out, you know, he didn't shout any sort of really extreme abuse.
No, he just called
him a sick man.
He just called the Duke of York, the Grand Old Ones of York. He called him a sick old man.
I don't know if, again, like time and a place, perhaps, but I don't know.
Yes, except for the fact that these aren't, for all that we would like them to be normal people, for all that we'd like for this to be an egalitarian country in which people were treated equally and with respect, these people rule over us, and to give them that respect when they have done nothing to earn it, I wouldn't have done what that man did. I would not have shouted at the Duke of York in the middle of an Edinburgh street in the procession after his mother's coffin. I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
But I would never knock someone for doing it, because I think it's very brave to stick your neck out, because it's easily possible that man could have been. I mean, if ironically, again, as I say, if he hadn't been dragged off by the police, that he could have been much more, you know, seriously been injured by the crowd.
Yes,
because I think that we need to remember that the people who actually want to gather to see things like the Queen's body in the coffin are people who are willing to inflict violence upon people they disagree with.
I wouldn't agree with that as a blanket statement.
No, but I'm not. It's not a blanket statement. It's just my opinion.
Well, no, but in saying the people willing to go see the Queen's coffin would inflict violence on a person.
No, I'm saying that the people who choose to, you're more likely to find you're likely to find more intolerant people amongst a monarchist crowd.
Okay, I follow what you're saying there.
I'm trying to say, if you go to a procession of the Queen's coffin, you're likely to find people who are.
There will be more hostility to. Yes, okay, there will be great hostility to overt disrespect.
Whereas
and
if, for example, you went to hypothetically, what's his name? Tony Benn, for example, when Tony Benn's coffin was going through the streets of wherever he was buried. When his coffin was processing, I imagine if you shouted something derogatory at Tony Benn or any member of the family that was in that procession, the crowd, by their nature, but by the selection bias of the people who would choose to be there, you would be less likely to find someone who would brutalize you for disagreeing.
I'm not sure if I agree with that either.
Not necessarily true. It would literally depend on the few people who'd be standing next to you, but in general, I think.
I think anyone who's going to turn out to watch a coffin of a well-known public figure proceed along a road is going to be having very strong feelings about that and strong feelings against anyone being disrespectful.
If you're going to shout at them, you're going to be in a hostile environment anyway. And I think it's also important to remember, you're in the hostile environment of the former chief of the armed forces.
Yeah,
that's
but then
thing.
this works into the whole free speech debate, because
people need to remember it doesn't exist in Britain.
On the one hand, well, because you mentioned the Public Order Act, and I'm not sure if people are getting arrested under that specific charge or
I don't know about in England, but in Scotland it's breach of the peace.
Yeah,
Scotland's got slightly different laws, haven't they?
And it does.
I don't know whether or not they're acting on the Police Crime and Sentencing Act that has just come in this year.
As far as I know, they're not.
And this is
that's
why
to do with organised protest.
With people that are dissenting.
If I can say my quick view on I don't know that. No problem. Here's me saying that, like you're not the host, Rowan. Sorry. I've lost my train of thought now. What I was going to say just on the protester with Prince Andrew is that on the legality, and I'm not incredibly well read on the nuanced differences between public order laws and breach of the peace laws and the difference between Scotland and England. I've just got a general sense that I've just got a general sense that the bar they have in Scotland is a little bit tighter on what people can say for what reasons. But I think that, as I've said, although I agree very much with the sentiment of what he said about Prince Andrew, and you will find no one as willing to call Prince Andrew horrible things in public as I am as well, I think that to have done so, like I say, in that context of the Queen's coffin going by in the period of national mourning amongst all the people come out to see her, I think that was in poor taste. Yeah. In addition, though,
you still have the right to say it.
Yes, absolutely. I was just about to say, in addition, I don't believe that he should have been arrested for having said it. I don't think that we should have a law on the books that says you cannot shout a point of view in a public place, even a public setting such as that. I think that we should be bound more by sort of, a sense of social convention. A sense of looking and shouting back and tutting and try and reinforce the feelings of what we consider to be appropriate amongst ourselves than needing the police to come and go, oh no, you said this in this place, off you go. But it seems to me that probably it was in the best interest of the chap to have been led away by the police purely for his own safety, because I do think if he'd stuck around there and carried on, he could have come to some harm.
He got pushed to the floor at one point, didn't he?
Yeah, but I don't. I mean, this is the problem. I know there's been a number of incidents this past week. I've heard about some people being arrested, some people being warned, some people being arrested then de-arrested. So I've got it. My wires slightly crossed what's ended up with them all. But I don't think there should be any form of charge against him for what he did here, as much as I disagree with it.
Yeah. Well, this leads in quite nicely to the video that we showed afterwards, where this barrister bloke was outside. He's in London, I think, and
he was outside the House of Commons.
Yeah, and he was having a word with a policeman, saying, because he had a blank piece of paper, saying, "If I put 'Not My King' on this piece of paper, will I be arrested?" And the policeman was pretty much saying that actually. You probably will be arrested because it's going to offend some people. And it's interesting, really, because it's like, well, who are you going to offend? And how do you know people are going to be offended? And, you could easily argue, if you were in a crowd full of Republicans and there was a person that held up a sign saying, "God save the King," will those Republican people feel offended? And will that person then be arrested for holding up a sign? It's because it works both ways, and it's interesting how much the right wing this week and also the left wing have been quite sort of hypocritical, because the left are quite big on their cancel culture, like you can't say that because it's offensive, and the right wing being like, oh, but free speech, you're allowed to say whatever you want, and it's
excuse me,
really striking this week. I think
that we're forgetting about the fact if you went to a group of Republicans and held up a sign saying "God save the King," even if they were offended, you're not attacking power there. You are, in fact, if
No,
anything, attacking
and you're
counterculture.
expressing an
You're
opinion.
saying you're expressing a view of support for the establishment in a
Mm.
space that is itself hostile to the establishment. I honestly don't think that anything would come of it, even if the group of Republicans did try to, seek the police. Say, we are, this Republican protest is offended that this person came into our ranks and was displaying, God save the king. I think that they would probably be dismissed. However, I think if it was the other way around, you had a pro-royal arrangement and you had then some Republicans trying to disrupt it, I think that it would be a different story. And I think that we need to remember that it doesn't go both ways, not in this country at least. If you attack power, you are vulnerable to power attacking you. However, if you attack people who are in opposition to the British government, the establishment, the monarchy, you are putting yourself out there to be attacked. And if people attack you, you have many fewer defences. And the establishment is not there to protect you. The police are not there to protect Republicans by their definition.
I just want to say on this matter of the larger issue of free speech as it was brought up. I think that it's interesting in a way because I've seen these different sides of the debate on Twitter interacting with each other over the past week as well. That and I'm speaking in very broad terms here. I'm not trying to put everyone in a box, but for the sake of argument, let's say the left, whoever we deem the left to be, being very overly sensitive about offence that may be caused and feeling that people airing certain views is not covered by free speech because it strays into what they would call hate speech, and therefore that should be an offence and you shouldn't be allowed to say certain things. And obviously the right taking a great deal of issue with that and feeling whether we're labelling it cancel culture or other things, whatever. You've kind of got that in a way, and then that's a debate and argument that's been boiling away for a long time. And then perhaps on the other side, you have the left feeling under attack in some ways with laws that have been passed recently, clamping down on people's right to protest under certain contexts, under the right to be able to air your views or to be able to have these mass gatherings protesting against this, that, or the other, and feeling that that is a infringement upon freedom of speech, freedom of expression. And then I think in the wake of this going on with, the Queen having died, people airing Republican sentiments and the police being very heavy-handed in some occasions here, again, there's this sense of, well, surely we should still be allowed to say these things. But why is it that our freedom of speech is being trodden upon here? And it's interesting that, again, broad terms here, that if we define the right, disagreeing with some of these things as far as the left is concerned, but more often than not, the main tone that I've seen from sort of the big Twitter commentators this week is people kind of going, well, this is what we've been saying for ages. We've been saying for ages that people should have free speech for this, that, or the other, whatever it is that your view is. We've always been saying that, and now you wanted to shut us down because you didn't like what we had to say because people were offended, and now you're throwing your toys because you can't be a Republican. To paraphrase what some people are saying, to put it in very simple terms, as far as I stand on it. Just because you have a point of view that other people might find offensive is not in of itself a reason for that point of view to be banned or illegal. No. There needs to be a bit more meat on the bones than that. It can't just be the possibility of causing offence.
No, exactly. And I think that like the argument of like, oh, someone might be offended. Okay, fine, let them be offended. Like, as long as it's not like you say, some kind of form of hate speech, or if it's sort of infringing on someone's human right to exist as themselves, like sort of racism or overt racism or misogyny, that sort of thing. As long as it's not sort of that sort of extreme, then fine. It's perfectly sort of harmless offense. I don't know if you can call it harmless offense because someone's obviously had their feelings hurt, but just let it be and then sort of move on.
Well, on its own, the thing is, these pieces of legislation kind of fall flat in the terms that they set for themselves. The very statement "someone might be offended" cannot possibly precede any police action. on the terms of the law itself. Because if it's about offence, then surely the police can only act once offence has been caused.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to
Otherwise it's
defend these. I'm not some
preemptive policing or
Yeah.
something,
Yeah.
isn't it?
That's
To be honest, it's Minority Report shit.
Yeah.
It's pre-crime.
We've
And
just
the
been
problem-
alerted someone might be offended on this street corner in 5 minutes
pre-crime
time.
doesn't exist.
Yeah,
The whole
yeah.
point about crime prevention is a social issue, not the actions of the police. The police only exist to retrospectively investigate crime after it has happened in order to prove X, Y, and Z, in order to, extract some penance out of the person who's done the crime. Ideally, that's the purpose of the police. In theory, obviously, they don't actually do that. All cops are, BAMs.
Yeah. It's just interesting how they seem to, the way that the police have been acting with regard this particular event.
It's like I said, they have carte blanche. They know they can get away with it.
Well, it's always like they're preempting unrest and violence. So it's like,
It doesn't exist.
are you about to commit a crime? Because if you are, then you must be careful.
Can I offer a devil's advocate for a moment here?
Yeah.
Do we think it could be possible that in many cases, actually, the police have been acting in a proportionate and responsible way for people's protests over this, but the collection of incidents we've heard about are the times where certain police have been overzealous in their response to this? Is it possible that we're seeing, the batch of the most extreme incidents out of otherwise what is a largely very permissive, yes, you're free to say what you like? Because the internet can have a habit of highlighting those things.
Yeah.
That can be the case.
I understand what you mean, but I wouldn't be that fair to the police.
But based on what we've already seen from the behaviours of the Met Police, I'd be inclined to go the other way and be like, no, they're extremely trigger happy people who, as soon as they get a whiff of something might happen, then they're out guns blazing and, doing what they want. And that's a very pessimistic way of looking at it. But
I think if anything, it highlights how submissive, for lack of a better term, we are as a population. That there hasn't been any significant protest. I mean, maybe it's because there is, as I think all three of us feel, no real need to be deliberately provocative towards people, the actual people who are grieving, not the people who are crying in the queue to go and see the coffin who've flown in from abroad. I mean, the people who are actually personally grieving the death of someone they knew.
Yeah.
And what I want to see is, it would be nice, but I don't expect this, to see protests in the months to come, especially around the coronation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And when the coronation happens, I will be very interested to see the level of protests, especially outside of London, because I feel like London, to very quickly digress, I feel like London is a two cities. It's the city of pomp and circumstance where everything important in Britain happens by the way that Britain has been, historically developed. But it's also possibly the most left-wing city in Western Europe. But the problem is that those two things very rarely collide, and it's very easy to bifurcate them. For example, when Sky News showed a protest that was pre-scheduled and going on and claimed it was a memorial vigil.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that was
just disgusting,
wasn't it?
That was bad journalism.
Chris Kaba, I think was his name, and he was shot by the Met Police, killed by the Met Police, and they were protesting it, demanding, retribution for it, and they were absolutely disgusted when they were described as some kind of Queen Elizabeth memorial vigil. When
that was
no matter what their opinion on the monarchy is, they're not there to do that. And to be described that they were there to do that is to not only misrepresent them, but to erase them.
That was our media's "Let's Go Brandon" moment.
Pretty much. And I would be very interested to see what happens when the coronation and other major events around the accession come around, and see where the protests are and where the cameras turn. Because I guarantee you, on the coronation day, we will hear absolutely nothing on the mainstream media about protests, and I also guarantee you there will be protests. I will be protesting on the coronation day if I can, wherever it is, however I can. I will do everything I can to say not my king, because he's not my fucking king. I didn't accept this. I was born into the Elizabethan era.
Yeah.
I am as sure as hell not going to be part of the Carolean era.
Yeah, and I think it's important to stress during this moment that there's a definite distinction to be drawn between the passing of the Queen and all that
The accession of the king.
and the accession of the king, which is a completely different bag.
One
and
is the unfortunate tragic death of a 96-year-old woman of natural causes. The
you should
other
you should allow
is a pompous twat becoming the head of state of an empire.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that you should draw a line and separate that one thing from the other. So
I agree, and
perhaps,
I do.
Perhaps the guy that was heckling Prince Andrew, he's got a right to say that, but then at the same time, it's perhaps very distasteful at the time.
He was being a bit of a dick.
Oh yeah, but then as you were talking about the accession of King Charles, which is still weird to say, then I think that's a good time to raise your dissenting opinions and views, because that's nothing to do with like the death of the Queen. It's basically
it can't be accused of
like
being
you were saying, it's
disrespectful.
like
I might need to double check my tweets, but I don't think I've said anything particularly bad over the last couple of days. The moment the Queen is in the ground, I am tweeting about this.
No, but if I could also just say as well that in my view, it like with regards to what the ascension of the king, all of this is just serving to tell me that all of this is happening to us. It's not happening like with us included. Like you're allowed to have a say in whether
we're spectators, not participants.
It's just happening to you. Like you're going to get a new king, and he's going to be on the throne, and he'll be regarded as King Charles III, and he's you're his subject, and he's the monarch.
He's your liege lord and master.
And like you don't get any say at all. Like this is just the thing that's going to happen, and here's all the people that are going to make that happen. No questions asked. And I'm like, hang on a second. Like we've just had a Tory leadership contest and vote whereby most of the country didn't get a say at all. We're now also getting a new king and monarch where we get absolutely no say at all. So all in all, quite democratic, I would say.
I was going to make one quick point. Oh,
go on.
Sorry, I was just going to make one very quick point, and it was
go on.
Just 2 seconds. So it used to be that when the king died, there was a general election.
Oh, really?
The last time I think that happened was 1837 when Queen Victoria acceded the throne. What it was is that the death of the reigning monarch invalidated the mandate of the government, and therefore the government had to seek. I mean, I might be wrong about this historically, but I think it's true that the government essentially had to seek a new mandate under a new monarch in order to continue in office, just as the Prime Minister needed to be reappointed when the Queen died. Liz Truss was appointed in Balmoral on Tuesday, and on Friday she was reappointed by the King in London.
Yeah.
Arguably, that was more democratic by the very, in the premises of our constitution. But that's not, of course, not going to happen. Instead, we are stuck with a prime minister we didn't choose, a government that was elected by by definition a minority of the people in this country, and a king that by his very nature as a hereditary monarch we'd get no choice of. Nothing about the way that we are governed right now is our choice. And anyone who describes Britain as a democracy needs to look at themselves in the mirror. No offense, Swiss, I know you called Britain a democracy earlier, but I think you understand what I mean.
I would call it one again if needs be. I want to pick up on an interesting point here, and I'm not trying to be pedantic. I'm genuinely sort of trying to look at interesting different ways of looking at this, because you say about way back when the monarch would die, there would be a general election, and is that not more democratic than our current situation today? And certainly in terms of the very obvious way one could look at it of just going, oh well, an election, putting it to the people. Who's the government going to be? You know, there's quite literally nothing more democratic than that. But in a slightly more nuanced way, perhaps, the difference between way back then, the government governing, you know, in the name of the monarch at the time, the monarch dies, therefore there needs to be another election because that monarch's no longer in place, versus the situation we have now, where it's no longer that intrinsically linked to the monarch. We had our last election, that happened, we elected a government, the monarch is gone, but that elected government is still in place despite the monarch going. Would you not perhaps say that that is something of a weakened link between our democratic element and that of the monarchy? The fact that we no longer have to have an election if the monarch dies.
Oh, I do actually agree with that point. Yes.
Okay.
I do actually think that there's no reason why there should necessarily be a general election just because there's a new monarch. If anything, there doesn't even need to be a new election just because there's a new prime minister. You know, Theresa May.
Yeah.
What's her name? Liz Truss. She was elected the head of her party, and the head of her party is the only party in government, and therefore it only makes sense that she becomes the prime minister. I'm not disputing that. That's how our thing functions. I don't think it should function that way, but I'm not going to dispute it.
Okay.
Well, I think that whenever there is a new leader elected who then becomes prime minister by default, I do think that there should be a general election. Even Jacob Rees-Mogg thinks that, by the way, because he's been, you know, interviewed saying that. So
I think you're being too generous to Jacob Rees-Mogg and suggesting that he thinks anything consistently.
that is true. Yeah.
He is a
Is it more to
master.
say he said it at one point in time?
He said,
Yeah.
I believe he said it when it would benefit his faction of the Conservative Party. I think you need to remember about Jacob Rees-Mogg is he's the
I think
kind
it was.
of man.
Was it during Theresa May's?
It was in the last few
Undoubtedly.
months of Theresa May's
Yeah.
premiership.
It must have been.
I think it was because he I think he viewed it better to see her defeated in an election or otherwise removed from office. I can't quite remember what it was. But the point is, Jacob Rees-Mogg is the kind of person who will say something one day, and
like
then the
Boris
situation
Johnson.
will change
Yeah.
for him, and he will say something completely different.
Yeah.
Like, for example, during the 2016 leadership campaign. One of the documentaries, I think made by the BBC about it, interviewed him at various stages, and they deliberately cut it together so that they showed Jacob Rees-Mogg saying, "I support Boris Johnson," and then they cut to the news announcement that Boris Johnson wasn't standing. Cut back to Jacob Rees-Mogg, "I support Michael Gove." Cut to Michael Gove being eliminated. "I support Andrea Leadsom." Andrea Leadsom retires from the campaign and allows Theresa May to become Prime Minister, and then cuts to Jacob Rees-Mogg. "I always supported Theresa May." That is the kind of man you're dealing with. And that man is in charge of
Very
all of your
opportunist.
business and energy.
Industrial
Energy, business, energy, and industrial strategy.
Yeah.
Which basically means we're going to extract every fluid ounce of fossil fuels from Britain. And we can only hope that the government is removed from power in an election before they are able to execute that plan, because I am genuinely prepared to have to start buying bottled water and being woken up at night by earthquakes.
I cannot, honestly, I cannot wait for the next election, probably because I have a genuine feel of optimism that we might actually be at the tail end of the Tories here.
I would never be that confident. I've seen polls over the last few days, and I think that I think Swiss is. Oh no,
sorry. Yes, I just cut out. I said my piece and then I missed what you replied.
All right, I was just going to say that I'm not quite as optimistic. I'm not necessarily saying that suddenly the Tories are going to get back into the lead, but I do feel like we need to remember that although Labour has been leading the polls for most of this year,
yeah,
so what, 9 months maybe. That can evaporate in the period of just one election campaign, because we need to remember the entire British media will mobilise against Keir Starmer. For all that we, as I think generally speaking, left of centre Republicans, people who have no affection for the British establishment, we also know
I mean, I'm not a
that,
Republican. I'm
well,
left of
whatever.
centre.
But the point is that we know the British media will go from Starmer as a Tory to Starmer as a communist in a snap of the fingers. You know, like Q in Star Trek. Snap the fingers. Starmer is no longer a red Tory. He's now a communist.
I don't think we'll see the same uniformity of opposition to Starmer from the media as we did Corbyn, though.
Oh no, he's guaranteed to do better than Corbyn did in 2017.
I think we can predict what Liz Truss's campaign will be like, and
you are a socialist.
That is a disgrace.
Oh.
Yeah.
He will send the economy backwards. We will send the economy forwards.
I think that not to prefigure the next election, but I think it's fair to say that, you know, the base stats of the leaders of the various parties imply that Truss will do badly, the Tories will do badly, Labour will do much better than it did last time, and probably even better than it did in 2017. But there is no guarantee that Labour will necessarily form the next government. We can be optimistic, but we shouldn't have that become false hope.
I agree.
The capacity of the establishment to preserve itself is truly remarkable.
It would be more a sense of that the Tories are so hated that everyone will just vote for a different party instead, rather than Labour are so amazing because they've got such amazing policy and transformation.
Oh, definitely. The only thing that could destroy the Tories is the Tories themselves. And every single time the Tories have been defeated since universal franchise has been a self-own.
Yeah. It certainly gets to a point where, you know, you've tried everything and you've run out of road, and I think the Tories have run out of ideas, and they don't know. You know, I think they are aware that they might lose the next election, and I think they're sort of preparing, and they'll have their sort of 5 years or however long off and be in opposition, and then they'll get back in probably. I hope not, but if they do, and then they'll be like, oh, but Labour did all this in this time and it's their fault and they caused all of these problems. And it's like, really, it's probably just Labour trying to tidy up your mess, really.
I want to be quick because my internet.
I
think he's
it's that bad.
I'm back. The first words I said were, "I want to be quick because my internet keeps cutting."
And it cut out before you were even able to say cut out. Anyway, yes.
Yeah. Right. I was going to say I agree with. I was worried then. I thought I saw Rowan as frozen then, but you were just sitting really still, so it's okay. No, I wanted to agree with what Calum said. I don't think there's any guarantees. But I certainly expect the Tories to move significantly backwards, Labour to make significant gains, and it will be in the campaign and the circumstances at the time whether we just about cross that threshold to a Labour government. As far as the establishment being against Labour, I'm not sure I quite agree with that to the same degree as you've put it, Calum. I certainly do believe that the Tories are the favoured party of whatever we're going to term the establishment. I've got no doubts about that.
I think you believe the establishment's more independent than it is. Oh, I think he cut out just as I started speaking. The point is that, like, I think the Tories and the British press are much more closely aligned than that.
Generally, yes.
Like,
generally, yes.
Tory leadership, the 1922 committee, the sort of the inner core of the Tory party do literally phone up editors of papers.
Yes, I think what I was going to say though is that as much as the Tories are generally favoured by the bulk of what we've called the establishment, that's not that's not a forever always rule. You know, Labour 1997, the worm had turned at that point, and there's nothing to say. I mean, Starmer's probably somewhere between a Blair and a maybe not that close to a Corbyn, somewhere between a Blair and a Miliband. If you,
I was going to say Brown and Corbyn. Sorry.
Yeah, but I think my point being that we won't see level.
Oh, you keep going.
Oh, God's sake!
Oh,
It's bloody internet. Guys, it may be best that I go because I'm ruining the quality of the stream.
I think we're going to wrap it up anyway in the next 5 minutes.
Yeah,
because we've been going on for nearly an hour and a half anyway.
Okay.
And I think we pretty much covered most of the week's news anyway, haven't we?
Yeah, there was one thing I was going to say, but that was to do with like the relationship between Scotland and the Union, but I don't feel I have time to elaborate on it now. But generally speaking, I was just trying to say that like I don't think anything conclusive can be drawn from the relationship that Scotland has had to sorry. I don't think Scottish civil society has reacted in a way that can be conclusively measured as a response to this event. I don't think Scotland is somehow more unionist. I don't think it has displayed any heightened unionism as a response to this. Maybe it's been more publicly viewed than it otherwise would have been. Nor do I think Scotland has suddenly become more Republican or become more nationalistic or separatist in the last couple of days than it was a week ago. I think, like everything else, especially to do with the sort of long-term political consequences of having a new monarch, it will not be properly addressed for a long time, months, years.
Well, it'll be interesting to see in the next sort of couple of years if any of the Commonwealth countries would desire to go independent, like fully independent, as a result of the Queen's death.
I certainly think Jamaica is probably
Jamaica planned to become independent before its next general election, which I believe is next year. So I think it was originally supposed to be this month that they were going to become a republic. They were kind of going to fast track it, like the last country to become a republic. But they delayed it until the next general election. But they will certainly become a republic very, very soon. And Australia, the Labour government there wants to become a republic, but I think they've delayed plans to introduce a referendum to become a republic until after the immediate period of mourning has blown over. So maybe next year Australia might vote on becoming.
I think it's later than that. If I'm right in what I read, they said not in this term of government. It would be something for the next term.
It may be that Australia will become a republic if the Labour government is re-elected sometime later in this decade. But I think by 2030 Australia will be gone.
Well, I think I think it sort of in terms of making final conclusive points. I think that I think this moment serves to. I think after, certainly after this like historic moment that's happened, I think the UK and Britain should, if we've not started already, need to sort of reevaluate who we are as a country and where we sit in terms of the world stage. And I think that we need to sort of have a look and see, are we really, the great power that we were in like the 1940s and 50s? Definitely not. And, it would be nice, if we didn't have a Tory government and we had a different sort of much more liberal government to sort of, really sit down with ourselves and, be happy with like who we are. We're greatly diminished as like a world power and an empire that no longer exists. So, we should sort of, probably settle down and be happy with, and like we can, obviously make the reforms that we want, but obviously we need to sort of realize that we're not as big as we used to be. And I think some people probably still do want to think that. and I think we should probably think in more in the realms of reality and what the UK actually represents and where it actually is in the 21st century. So
I agree with everything you just said, and I wanted to make a point, my last point, that everything's still very up in the air. We cannot draw any conclusions. It's all very vague at the moment. We've talked for an hour and a half about everything that is sort of around this week.
Yeah. We've managed to say everything that's needed to be said in an hour and a half, whereas the media's dragged it on and on for a whole week. So
yeah, but here's a suggestion. Maybe we have another stream in 3 weeks, and we say it's been a month since the Queen died. The Saturday of October, or maybe even 3 weeks on Thursday or something. And we talk and say, well, given that weeks, decades can happen in weeks, who knows how many decades will pass between now and the beginning of next month? Just a thought. We don't have to, but I thought it's so everything is so in flux at the moment that it is so difficult to draw any conclusions, that maybe we will have a more solid perspective in a month. Certainly, with the Queen in the ground, the grovelling will hopefully have ended, and people will start to see sense.
Yeah. I think Swiss keeps freezing.
I do. About every 30 seconds, it seems to come in waves. In which case, I'll just say I'm not going to offer any closing thoughts because I'll get cut off midway through. But I'm sure you can summarise roughly what I've thought throughout the process.
We know that your closing thoughts.
I'm a constitutional monarchist, but let people have the free speech to be Republicans. There we go.
Yeah.
We know that your concluding thoughts would ultimately be both gracious and nuanced.
Thank you.
And not quite as deferential as what we've been seeing.
And not as violently Republican is my point of view.
Yeah,
the nice happy Switzerland in the middle, as always.
And a good balance of sort of left-wing alternative discussion, and not as much of the fluff as you would have seen on the TV. So I think hopefully this stream has been helpful and a breath of fresh air to those that are watching. So brilliant. Thank you, Calum and Swiss, for joining me this afternoon. From what has been a very, very eventful week in news and a very historic event in news as well. This will be saved on the internet for years to come. Thanks all for joining, and we will see you again in another stream sometime soon. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Bye.